Over the past 3 years, the wide receiver position has slowly become the focal point of fantasy football. This year alone, 6 out of the top 12 selections in fantasy drafts are wide receivers. But just because wide receivers have gotten pushed up the board doesn't necessarily mean they are all great picks. The elite remain in their own tier, and then the rest can be kind of hard to sort out. So on today's episode of the Regression to Mean podcast, we have ranked the top 53 wide receivers in fantasy football this season and broken them into 9 tiers. I'm joined by my co-hosts, my good friends, and my fellow knowers of ball, Aidan and Keegan. Keegan, how are we doing today, man?
Not too bad. I saw Bijan Robinson wearing the same hat I'm wearing this week, posted on the official Atlanta Falcons page. So huge boost for the hashtag brand.
So for the listeners at home, this is Keegan's brand. He didn't just buy a hat that Bijan also bought.
No, I'm just that in on Bijan Robinson this year.
Keegan's just a fanboy.
Communal Cowboy, go check it out. Bijan Robinson rocks it. Who else? Who else has been famous that's rocked it? Did Sidney Sweeney rock it? Okay, no. Brooks. Okay, not Sidney Sweeney.
I like where your head's at.
Okay, yeah, that would be big for the program. Communal Cowboy, again, go check it out. Smoke him if you got him. Aidan.
Wow, shameless plug there. I was not expecting that. I was just happy to see that on the Atlanta Falcons account. But yeah, shameless plug.
That's what we do here, right, on the Regression to Mean podcast. Aidan, how you doing today, man?
I'm good. The three of us are drafting this Saturday.
Pretty feels so soon.
We are out to the desert to get our first live draft of the season under our belt. So I'm ready. I'm a little anxious. It just feels too early, but it's only like a week, maybe 2 earlier than we normally do. So no, I'm ready to go, ready to defend my throne.
Yeah, we're recording this Monday, August 12th, around 6 p.m. Pacific time. We just got the news that potentially Jahmyr Gibbs just got hurt, and that makes you get really weird about drafting this early. Not going to lie. My first thought was, well, 1, hopefully Gibbs is fine, but 2 is like, ooh, if this is happening this week, it's probably going to happen next week after I've already drafted my team. So it definitely makes me a little bit nervous. Okay, guys, draft dates, a tangent aside. The format for today's episode is pretty straightforward. I've gone ahead. I've ranked the top 53 wide receivers. I've broken them into 9 tiers. Keegan, our resident Gen Z expert, has thrown them into a tier maker machine. Keegan, have you made the tiers yet, or are we going to do it live? We're doing it live?
We will do it live.
Okay.
Holy shit.
Yeah. We're going to do it live. Let's go.
Oh, my God.
Awesome. We're going to get the screen share going. Keegan's going to build the tiers out in real time. I'm going to go tier by tier, and I'm going to break down some of the biggest differences that I have between my ranks and average draft position. And also, Keegan and Aidan are here to tell me where I'm spot on or where I'm way off. Right? I need their feedback here. Boys, are we ready?
Let's do it, brother.
All right. So kicking things off here with tier 1. Honestly, each one of these guys I feel like is interchangeable in this tier. I don't really have a strong lean anyway. I've got Tyreek Hill at wide receiver 1, CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver 2, and Justin Jefferson at wide receiver 3. I feel like those are the without a doubt alphas of the alphas, the elite of the elite. I know Jettas has some QB issues, but the man put up 1,000 yards in like 10 games with 3 different quarterbacks. I think he's just going to be fine with Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy. CeeDee's contract holdout makes me a little nervous. You know, Tyreek is getting a little bit older, but I don't know, guys. These are just like the undisputed 3, in my opinion. What do you think? Am I off basis here?
Not hard to nitpick this category. It's like the tier 1 guys, right? Your absolute alphas, target hogs, number 1 wide receivers, and very potent offenses. It's like hard to argue. I think you can take whatever flavor you like here. Who says Justin Jefferson can't be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football again?
I'm with
Definitely
you. Definitely
not me.
I'm with you. I think you could add 1 guy. I think you could make a case for 2, but I think you can make a case for ARSB in here, given the pure volume that he's going to see, like the volume he already saw last year. You could bend my arm for Jamar Chase too. He's got T. Higgins there, so it's it's not quite the absolute target dominance that these other 4 guys are going to get. But I think these 3 make the most sense to keep as is. But I think the argument is there to expand this to 5.
I appreciate that. So again, this tier I had the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
For
Totally.
the second tier, I had Chase at wide receiver 4. I had ARSB at wide receiver 5. I had AJ Brown at wide receiver. Cooper Kupp.
Throwing a little Cooper Kupp there.
AJ Brown
2022
at wide receiver 6, and then I had Garrett Wilson at wide receiver 7. So this tier is probably won't be the wide receiver one, but definitely could. So like that's the way that I've differentiated this. Is these top 7 I think are all great picks. I just think the top 3, their ceiling is just really hard to compete with. Now Chase, even in a down year, he finishes the wide receiver 12 in points per game at 16 fantasy points per game. Like he's a big bounce back candidate this year with a healthy Burrow. There's been talk about moving him into the slot. If he starts to see more layup targets, I definitely agree with you, Aidan. He could easily be in that top tier. But you're right. He has T. Higgins. They spread the ball around. They're hyping up Burton, Yosavas. They throw it to their running backs a ton. So I'm not saying Chase can't do it. I just feel like those top 3 have pulled away from Chase over the past couple of seasons. But I don't know. It's kind of splitting hairs at this point. I'm curious from our resident Jets homer, how do you feel about Garrett Wilson? Because there's a lot of hype. I've heard multiple people get on podcasts and say Garrett Wilson's their wide receiver 3. Like, do you think that's in his range of outcomes? Like, what are you expecting here from Garrett Wilson in year 3 with Aaron Rodgers?
If you just look at it from an expected fantasy points and total fantasy points per game output, there is nobody in the NFL at the wide receiver position who is due for more positive regression than Garrett Wilson. Like, he leads the entire NFL. I think I have it filtered out by minimum of 8 games played for all pass catchers as the highest positive regression candidate at the position. I mean, his expected fantasy points per game was around 18.3, and he only turned out about 13.11 PPR points last year in fantasy. So there's a lot of room for improvement. The quarterback play will obviously help. I think everybody's imagining him just being the Davante Adams of this portion of Aaron Rodgers' career, which is all fine and dandy. But at the same time, it's still the Jets. It's still Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles injury.
Emotionally hedging. He's doing it. He's talking himself out of joy.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be joyful about it. I think he could be due for a really big season, but to surpass and supplant CeeDee, JJ, Tyreek, he's got to do something crazy, which is basically average 20 points a game, which many wide receivers do not do. I do think he can perform at his ADP, no problem. I don't feel like people are kind of poo-pooing on the fact that there's 2 Jets in the first round, but you can pick Garrett Wilson, and I feel like he's going to pay off where you draft him. So.
I've seen people poo-pooing that too. I'm sorry that the Jets just have 2 really good skill position players, and it's very concentrated between those 2. It's it's not
deal with it.
They're just really good.
Deal with
the
it.
Talents. Yeah, the talent's there. I don't know.
they're really good. Just deal with it. Yeah.
One guy that I think is interesting in this tier before we jump to the next tier, AJ Brown, new contract, new OC, likely more up-tempo offense. I do think though that last year with that really static offense that Brian Johnson called, that DeVonta Smith really took a back seat. They kind of just stuck him on one side of the formation and made it really hard for him to win. I wouldn't be that surprised if Kellen Moore mixes in a little bit more DeVonta Smith, gives him more layup targets, which is good. DeVonta Smith's a really good player, but I wouldn't be shocked if that kind of ate into some of AJ Brown's upside. Not enough for me to flag plant and move him out of the tier because the up-tempo nature of the offense may just keep him at that wide receiver 5 level. But that's just something I kind of wanted to call out, that I think DeVonta Smith could see a little bit more run in this offense. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
More pre-snap motion from Kellen Moore for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of banking on that same theory that, he cuts into a little bit of the production, but we'll see. AJ Brown's an absolute dog. He's an absolute nightmare, absolute nightmare to cover. So we'll see. I'm excited.
I don't think it eats in at all. Okay. I honestly think he's going to go crazy again.
Yeah.
If we get more AJ Brown slot targets, it's going to be, oh, baby.
We need a hose.
See you at the cashier.
Yeah.
But before we get to the next tier, one thing. As a newer fantasy football channel on YouTube, we're still building our audience. If you found us for the first time today and you're enjoying our content, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the Raresh Shamin podcast. We all have full-time jobs. We do this as a passion project, and we one day hope we can turn this into something more, but we can't do that with the support from all of you.
Not unless you've liked the video, man.
Like it, subscribe,
comment,
notifications. All right. Okay.
Be nice to us in the comments.
Moving on to the next tier here. This one's tough. This one's a little tough for me. This tier could have been a mega tier. This tier could be 4 tiers. I'm kind of confused, and I need your help. At wide receiver 8 here, I've got Deebo Samuel. Wide receiver 9, Puka Nacua. Wide receiver 10, Davante Adams. Wide receiver 11, Marvin Harrison. 12, Nico Collins. 13, Chris Olave. 14, Mike Evans. 15, Cooper Kupp. So we need Chris Olave.
Gosh, this thing's putting me in
Mike
a blender.
Evans,
Holy cow.
Cooper Kupp. You're keeping up, dude. You're keeping up. So this tier I have labeled strong top 12 weekly plays any given week. That's how I'm approaching it. There'll be a wide receiver 1 pretty much any given week. Maybe they bounce down to high-end wide receiver 2 if in a bad matchup. But, I mean, the guys that I have way up in this category versus ADP are Deebo, Nico Collins, and Cooper Kupp. And the guys that I'm down on this tier, Marvin Harrison, Chris Olave, kind of down on Puka. You have to be down on Puka a little bit if you want to be up on Kupp. Yeah, but I don't know, guys. Like, are you dropping anyone from this tier? It's kind of tough. There's some question marks. Like, this is very flat. I don't know if one guy is really better than the other. You could pick any of these guys and it'd probably work out. But I know in this tier there's a league-winning receiver, but I just don't know who it is yet.
It's got to be Nico.
I love Nico.
I absolutely adore Nico. He's probably my favorite one out of this tier. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is absolutely set to take off in that offense. It feels like the play calling, like if you watch Arizona last year, really wasn't that bad. They just had no guys. Like it's pretty perfectly set up for him to, step right into 120, 130 targets. I think Kyler is really good at throwing the ball pretty much all over the field, like outside the numbers, short stuff, long ball. I think his skill set's absolutely perfect there. One question I did have for you in this tier, are you assuming Deebo, with your Deebo ranking, that Aiyuk is not there? Because personally, for me, I can't rank Deebo ahead of Aiyuk if they're both Niners.
Yeah, so this is a little hashtag no bias, but I'm spoiler alert, I'm wearing a Giants hat, but I'm a Niners fan. So I've followed this team all offseason. It's just been an absolute shit show of an offseason. Just an absolute nightmare. Our left tackle's holding out. Our receiver is flirting with Jaden Daniels and Mike Tomlin and holding in. It's just been a shit show for the Niners fans. Everyone's hurt and injured. Really, the only bright spot has been Deebo Samuel showing up really in shape, looking skinny, faster than ever, like clear pathway back to captain status. He seems ultra motivated, and it's basically a contract year for him. He's either going to get cut or get an extension from the Niners, and it's kind of make it or break it for him at this point in his career to get a next big contract. And I see 3 scenarios here with Brandon Aiyuk. 1, he gets traded, which is really good for Deebo Samuel. 2, he holds out, which is really good for Deebo Samuel. I don't think he's going to hold out, but that's an option. And 3, he plays for the Niners. Now, when does he end this hold-in? When does he sign his contract? What does this look like? I think the farther we get into the offseason without Brandon Aiyuk practicing, the better it is for Deebo Samuel. We saw this 2 years ago with Deebo Samuel. He had that holdout, and he didn't train as hard because he didn't want to get injured, and he kind of sucked for like half the year. And I feel like this happens with hold-ins and holdouts. They don't necessarily get themselves into as good a football shape. We saw it with Nick Bosa last year too. He wasn't very good for the first 8-9 weeks because he didn't have a training camp. It's like I'm just anticipating that Deebo, at least for the first half of the year, is going to be the focal point of the passing attack. Maybe in the second half, Aiyuk reestablishes himself. But in terms of like fantasy points per game, they're like neck and neck. Deebo is actually wide receiver 13 in a point per game basis, playing second fiddle basically to Aiyuk and CMC. Like CMC has this calf injury. I'm starting to see the ceiling outcomes could potentially happen where everything runs hot. Similarly, like Keenan Allen last year where everyone got injured. It was just like the Keenan Allen show. I could see that happening to Deebo this year. So that's why I have a high ranking on Deebo. Just as kind of a Niner fan reading the tea leaves. Now I could be off, but that's where I'm at.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. No, those are all valid points. I'm curious to see how it shakes out. I'd be shocked if he's not a Niner. But we'll see. The longer it goes on, just like it's just messy. It's just messy.
Been a great offseason, guys. Been a great one.
Yeah.
Fun. I'd say Cooper Kupp is a big one here in this too. Like the drumbeat has been ultra consistent. Like Kupp is fully healthy. There's some age-related stuff we're concerned about, but it's hard not to get excited about a healthy Cooper Kupp. What are we doing here? Because he's like seems like a really big value if he actually is Cooper Kupp again.
Because it's like, is his days of being like the legit like focal point and like number one design in that offense completely over? Is it kind of like what if first read targets look like? Like I just don't know what the split's going to be like between the two of them, but it does feel like you're getting him at an insane value given, he's not far removed from, wide receiver one seasons. It's a huge gamble. Huge gamble.
He had a stretch where he scored over 17 fantasy points per game in 25 out of 26 games. And he averaged 25 fantasy points per game during that stretch. That was from 2021 to 2022 before he got hurt in the middle of 2022. So I don't know. I'm getting like CMC vibes where CMC put those 2 injury years behind him and then just went off. It's kind of starting to feel that way, but I don't know, man. All these guys are good. I like Kupp. I like Deebo. I like Nico. But again, you're not like going to take a bad player in this tier, in my opinion.
I just think there's some definitely some age landmines in that tier that we have ranked really high here that are definitely concerning. So like, you got to pay attention to Davante Adams and Mike Evans and Cooper Kupp as well. I think there's just a couple potential bad case scenarios for that. But no, we can move on to the next tier.
Would you separate the olds from the youngs and put the olds in their own tier? Or would you just keep it as like a tier 3 tier?
Well, I mean, there's a wide receiver that we just put into the next tier, Jaylen Waddle, that I think deserves a spot in this tier. I mean, when we look at the type of offense Jaylen Waddle is, how old he is compared to these two, like it's not just contingent upside. It's like he was banged up last year and still had some ultra productive moments in the season. And I think with Tyreek Hill, him, Tua, and the way Mike McDaniel runs the offense, like there's potential for him to have massive blow-up games, like the kind that like win you a matchup from a singular player. And I'm fine with the other players in this tier. I think Davante Adams scares me the most, but he is a positive regression candidate. They just don't have sturdy quarterback room. But those are just some of the thoughts I had.
That's putting it nicely with that quarterback room. That is putting it real nicely.
That's all right. Yeah, but we can go on to this next tier because I think there's more to talk about within it. There's a ranking in here that Shaun has that I'm very excited to dive into. Yeah,
that needs to be addressed.
Okay, so Jaylen Waddle is going to kick things off, wide receiver 16. I've got Drake London, wide receiver 17. Michael Pittman, wide receiver 18. Is Malik Nabers in the graphic?
He should be. Malik
Nabers,
still
wide
rocking
receiver
the purple and gold.
19. I got Aiyuk, wide receiver 20. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 21. And I've got DJ Moore at wide receiver 22. So my co-hosts here are a little aghast at my Rashee Rice ranking.
Before we get to Rashee Rice, let's talk about the top half of the tier because I want to make sure the other players get talked about before we get into the Rashee Rice debate. Like I think I do want to highlight that Jaylen Waddle probably deserves to be in this tier above. Like I know in best ball, I'm taking him in the second round. Home ADP leagues is different for sure, but this is a very exciting player that can potentially be a league winner that you're getting a really good value on. So I just want to call attention to that for the listeners. I think maybe the underrated thing that we're not talking about here is the low ranking you have on Drake London. I think despite the rocky start to his career and bad quarterback play, everyone who's anyone is still ranking Drake London as like a potential 1-2 turn guy in best ball going in the middle of second rounds in home leagues. Like what do we think about Drake London, like as a pod? And I'm curious to hear what brought him so low for you, Shaun, and how this ranking, if he was drafted here, I think I'd be taking a lot more Drake London.
Me too.
Compared to where he's actually being drafted right now. Because if I saw Drake London at this, what do you have him? Wide receiver
17.
17.
Oh, yeah. I'd take him if he was the 17th receiver off the board for sure.
Yeah. So curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, again, my rankings are guys, like I just stack rank it and guys that I would draft over who. Like at the end of the day, if I had to choose between Jaylen Waddle and Drake London, I'm going to draft Jaylen Waddle.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
That's how I approach it, right? With Drake London, so I ran the Sims. His high outcome. I ran the Sims, and his high range outcome is 17 fantasy points per game. He is being drafted as the wide receiver 12. The wide receiver 12, on average, has averaged over the past couple of seasons, has averaged over 16 fantasy points per game. They've seen 100 plus catches, over 1,100 receiving yards, and 6+ TDs. Like, that's the average. I feel like that's a lot for Drake London. Like, that seems, the guy's been the wide receiver 43 and wide receiver 44 in back-to-back seasons. We think he's good. He was a good prospect. He definitely has good like reception perception scores, but he didn't really fare very well in ESPN's open score. The sims aren't that favorable. Like, if you don't do it in the first 2 years, it's kind of hard to see it in year 3. Like, I definitely feel like he could have a nice season, and he probably will. But at wide receiver 12, you're talking about him averaging 17, 18 fantasy points per game. Like,
yeah,
for him to really
average 16 and above last year is like a pretty good list of who's who at the wide receiver position. But it starts with like Nico Collins, then Michael Pittman, Steph Diggs, Aiyuk, Samuel, Jamar Chase, DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, and then it's a tier break, and then it's like Amon, Keenan, CeeDee, Tyreek, who all averaged 20 points and above per game last year. So it's a big jump. And if you look at who we talked about earlier in that second tier, Garrett Wilson and Drake London, like, it's hard to say whose quarterback and offensive situation has been better, but at the very least, like, Garrett Wilson is earning an absurd amount of targets, still able to cross that threshold of 1,000 yards. I think people are like, well, why should we draft Garrett Wilson there if we're not drafting Drake London? It's like, not only have we seen it, like, the quarterback situation has been just as bad, if not worse, than what Drake London had. Like, at least there was some consistency in the Atlanta Falcons quarterback room. So that's kind of like my take on the why Drake London or why not Drake London, but why Garrett Wilson. It's like, well, I mean, the man earns targets at an absurd rate, has also eclipsed 1,000 yards twice, and is going from Tim Boyle, Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, like, the list goes on. Chris Streveler for a quarter, you know.
Dude, and like, Olave has been kind of disappointing. Olave hasn't even cracked 16 fantasy points per game yet. Like, I think Olave has been way better than Drake London, and Olave probably is better than Drake London. So I get it. Everyone wants to blame Arthur Smith, blame the quarterback play, and it will be much better next year. However, I'm just not going to draft Drake London as ceiling. Like, fool me once, shame on you.
It's too risky.
Fool me twice, shame on me. I've drafted a ton of Drake London through the first 2 years of his career, a ton of Kyle Pitts. Like, I just want to see him do it. I'll happily draft him next year, but at this time, I'd much rather draft Cooper Kupp, Jaylen Waddle over Drake London and all those guys. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it.
Now that we've cleared up some of those top things, Aidan, is there any other people you'd like to talk about? Because I feel like this Rashee Rice thing might take a second. So get your thoughts in while you can.
Yeah, I think Aiyuk is too low again. I already kind of talked about that one. Like, I have trouble putting him above or below Deebo, and then I love Nabers here. The guy's going to walk into 130 targets. Like, there's truly no one else in that room. The buzz around Daniel Jones has actually been pretty decent.
Bearded Daniel Jones. I call him Dan. I call him Dan Jones now with the beard.
That's DJ. Yeah. So no, I'm pretty excited about Nabers, and yeah, you're getting him, but he's wide receiver 24. Shaun's even a little higher than him at 19. Yeah. So no, I think this guy's a freak. I think it's just gonna, like, you know, it might not be pretty, but he's gonna just get absolutely peppered with targets, peppered with catches. So no, I really like him here in this tier. All right.
By the way, too, I'm higher. I'm way higher on consensus than Jaylen Waddle. I love how Keegan's like, got to get Waddle higher up. I was like, man, I feel like I had Waddle pretty high up already. But
I'm pretty like confident in him this year. It's definitely like a player that I'm flag planting. Like, that's probably just personal preference. But if I look at some of the names of people you have at least tiered above him and like how it's being drafted, just like across the board of all leagues, I'm like, I notably higher. It's not just like I'm not trying to ignore what your positions are. Like, I know you're a little bit higher too, but it's just like, I'm pretty in on Jaylen Waddle.
I mean, we'll throw him in tier 3. Do it.
Yeah,
throw him in there.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm in.
Live ranking changes.
Throw him in there, and then throw Drake London into tier 5. No, I'm joking.
Wow, he just graduated in front of our eyes. That was cool.
He just graduated in front of our eyes. Jaylen Waddle, you've done it. You're in tier 3. We have a couple wide receiver 2s in there already. He can join Cooper Kupp there. So Rashee Rice, I have him 15 spots ahead of ADP. So if he was not going to be suspended, like if there were no reckless driving charges, potentially, felonies that he's got right now that he's cooking up, He'd probably be going in this end of the second, early third round. Probably, right? Year 2, the number 1 receiver to Patrick Mahomes, coming off of last year, coming off what he did down the stretch. He was the wide receiver 8 from week 12 on. He was the wide receiver, I think, 13 from week 10 on. Like he was awesome once they gave him the full-time role. He probably is going in like the third round, right? If there's no suspension looming, you just have to make that assumption. Like that's what I think. That's what I've heard other people say it. I think it's a pretty fair assumption.
This is.
I don't think he's going to miss. I don't think he's going to miss any time. I don't think he's going to miss a game this year.
So I think going back to your logic about picking these tiers, you're telling me that you're taking him over DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, DeVonta Smith, if they're like one versus one on the board.
DJ Moore's a toss-up. I'm taking him over DeVonta Smith for sure.
Man.
And DK Metcalf, for sure. Dude, guys, this is like Mahomes' number 1 wide receiver. They're going to be limiting Kelsey snaps, saving him for the playoffs. Hollywood Brown already fucking broke his collarbone. Xavier Worthy's like 150 pounds soaking wet. Like, I think at the end of the day, Rashee Rice is going to be the alpha in this offense. He's a Deebo Samuel light. Like, I'm very high on his role within this offense and his development as a receiver. He's a very unique type of player with what he can generate yards after contact. And he's in Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes' offense. And he was really good as a rookie. Usually rookie wide receivers don't do that well in Andy Reid offenses. I just think if he doesn't miss any games this year, this guy's a weekly top 12 wide receiver play.
Man, that's rich.
It's too rich for my blood.
That is the same exact word. Like,
I just like,
rich.
I know Hollywood will maybe miss, like, he could potentially miss week 1, but he's not going to miss the entire season. Like, they did bring in Xavier Worthy. They have stressed how much they would like to extend the field and move away from the offense that they had last year, more downfield shots. Travis Kelce, while they probably would like to put him in bubble wrap for most of the year, is still going to be a target earner in this offense. And it's no guarantee that we can predict who the hell Andy Reid wants to throw the ball to on any given week. The room is more crowded than ever. They still have a solid run game with Isaiah Pacheco. And Rashee Rice is effectively going to be like a power slot wide receiver, which is good for fantasy. It can mean more layup targets, but if you just think of that role and you think of the outside receivers that they have, both very speedy guys, you hear the coach speak about how they like to push the ball down the field more. Like, how does that factor into Rashee Rice being, like you said, if there was no suspension looming, potentially a third round wide receiver? It's like, well, people are probably still going to draft Travis Kelce ahead of Rashee Rice, like regardless of suspension or not. So the market still thinks that Travis Kelce is the number 1 option there in Pat Mahomes' Andy Reid offense. And then you get 2 speed guys on the outside. Like, there's a lot of competition, and there was nobody to compete with last year outside of Kelce for targets. Like, Rashee Rice did succeed, but they needed him to. Like, it was so bad. Like, Kadarius Toney was giving points off the board to other teams. Sky Moore is not a real receiver. Justin Watson is a non-factor. I mean, somebody had to catch the ball last year. I'm not saying this role in the power slot will be bad for him, but there are still things that Rashee Rice needs to improve on to be like a third round fantasy wide receiver.
But he was the wide receiver 8 in the fantasy playoffs, like week 12 on. Like, I think he will improve. You see that in year 2. But what you just sold me on makes me so excited. He's the slot receiver that breaks tackles in Andy Reid's offense with Patrick Mahomes. Like, that sounds like a godly fantasy role. Like, you're just going to get layup targets all day long, and you're going to break 5 tackles every reception.
But he's not. That's also the point I'm going to make. He's not going to get them all day long. Like, they have way more mouths to feed, and good mouths to feed. Like, they don't look around the room and they look at Justin Watson, a hungry Sky Moore, and Kadarius Toney and say, like, we should probably feed them. No, they're just like, we're just going to feed Rashee Rice a little bit more. But now they look at Xavier Worthy. They'll look at Hollywood Brown. They'll look at Kelce. They've got a good run game. Like, they have to distribute those, and they're not going to go back to an offense, I think, like it was last year, where it's just like, we'll take what the defense gives us. Like, they're going to push the ball down the field more. They're going to be a lot more busy on some long developing routes. Like, I just don't think it's his game. He might get some valuable PPR stuff, but if this was half PPR league we're talking about, I don't know if I'm drafting Rashee Rice in the third round. Suspension,
PPR,
without a suspension.
For sure. In PPR. I mean, this is PPR rankings, right? Like,
of course, I know, but other people that draft, they're not all in PPR, so it's important to call attention to it. Yeah. it's a big projection on a second-year wide receiver who's like a above average prospect.
Yeah, I think he's going to be similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown in year 2. Like, that's my call, honestly.
That is so crazy.
Very similar player, very similar role that they had in their first year. That's my flag plant. But we can leave it there if we want to.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next tier of guys here. Wide receivers 23 through 30. I've got DeVonta Smith, DK Metcalf, Stefon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, T. Higgins. I like not love this tier. I don't know if I'm on the clock, if I need to really run to hit the smash button on drafting any of these guys. I have a lot of these guys down versus ADP. I like Keenan Allen in this tier though. I think it's going to be really hard to push off the field. I think a lot of people are penciling in Rome Odunze, saying like he's going to just bump DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen was incredible last year. 3rd in fantasy points per game, wide receiver 1 level usage, fantastic open score. I think he's going to be Caleb Williams' security blanket. 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. It's going to Keenan Allen. He's very similar to Stefon Diggs in terms of a profile, in my opinion. You can get Keenan Allen later. So I like Keenan Allen in this tier. He feels really safe. Anyone in this tier that really excites you? Anyone that, you want nothing to do with, Aidan?
Nothing to do with. There's a guy that I want in this tier that I think absolutely fits in with all these guys, and it's Christian Kirk. Kind of like the label of this tier is, steady wide receiver 2s with upside. Like, we're looking at Trevor Lawrence's clear-cut wide receiver 1, proven, top 15 receiver before in terms of fantasy points per game finishes. So I'd put Christian Kirk in here. Nothing to do with in this tier, man. I don't know. That's tough. I've never been a big DK drafter, and I'm really not jumping to do it this year with, kind of some of their offensive line. And, Geno Smith is fine, but the offensive line is, pretty shaky at best. Not a big T. Higgins drafter. It burned me last year. And then I don't know. It's kind of just I think you put it well. Like, I'm just not dying to draft anyone in this tier. Like, we're going to get into this next tier, and I'd pretty much draft every single guy that we're about to talk about. Whereas here, I think, probably just skip it. This is probably where you could go Ely QB if you really wanted to. Maybe take a running back before you get into the dead zone. So I don't know. It's not a tier that I'm really all that excited about personally.
I think it's really interesting that you have Diggs above Tank Dell. Like, I'm pretty of the thought process that Stefon Diggs will likely slide into similar to what we're talking about Rashee Rice and what Cooper Kupp is in this point of his career, like more of a power slot role. And like, he will get some like layup targets, but Tank Dell is like a proven winner on the outside. And, the splits with him and Nico Collins while they played together are like so similar. It's hard to debate like who's actually a better option for them on the outside. Like, Tank Dell just wins way above his size. And then outside of Tank and Steph, that ranking, like DeVonta Smith with the pre-snap motion, like you were talking about, might be hurting AJ Brown. Like, he's going to get some better looks in the Kellen Moore offense, and like they're not going to be as stagnant. And I think it's going to boost him quite a bit. This is probably like straw on the camel's back year for me in drafting DK Metcalf. I do it every year. Every year it's like DK Metcalf leads NFL in red zone targets. DK Metcalf, like go-to red zone target, but it never really materializes into anything. Like, I'm still waiting on it to happen. So I'll still be drafting him at this price. I think Amari's a bargain. Like, they're going to pass the ball and just run a ton of plays in Cleveland. And then, T. Higgins and Zay Flowers are both really awesome, like number 2 options in their offense. Zay Flowers is the number 1 wide receiver option, but obviously Mark Andrews exists. So I think this is one of my favorite tiers to draft out of. Like, I don't know how in I am on Keenan Allen or Steph Diggs this year, but everybody else you could talk me into.
I love that.
I love a good zag. Yeah, we're opposite.
I love a good zag. Like, all these guys are good picks. Like, I don't like T. Higgins, but he's a good pick at ADP.
He actually is a good pick this year.
The issue with T. Higgins is you always had to,
you guys
always had to pay up.
He's a good pick.
He just cooked me last year. Yeah, he cooked me last year. So it was just
he was really injured last year, but it was almost like he'd have a good year and then he was overpriced the following year because he's just such a tantalizing player.
Totally.
His ADP is pretty cheap. You can get him as the wide receiver 27. That's a good pick.
No, it's a great price.
Tank Dell versus Steph Diggs. I just think Diggs is going to be better in PPR, at least more consistent. But I mean, I love Tank Dell. Tank Dell's probably my favorite pick in this tier, to be honest. Talk about a swing for upside. That's Tank Dell.
Yep.
For sure. Next tier, guys, that I've got wide receivers 31 to 36. I've got George Pickens, Christian Kirk. I'm already regretting that. Actually, let's do real time. Let's flip Kirk and Pickens.
Yes.
Actually,
yeah.
Put him in tier 5.
Yes. Yes.
This doesn't feel right.
The bad guys have won.
Let's go.
Yes.
Christian.
Okay, so we're going to have Pickens in this tier. I've got Terry
that.
McLaurin next. I've got Chris Godwin. I've got Deontay Johnson. And I've got Calvin Ridley. This tier is very interesting. I'd say guys that I'm up with. I mean, the guys that I'm high on in this tier, Deontay Johnson. I think like ceiling outcome is probably capped by this Panthers offense. But the man's going to walk into like 140 targets, and you can draft him as like your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. I'm going to take that every day of the week. Like that's easy money. But yeah, I mean, is anyone speaking to you in this tier? I know, Keegan, do you like Calvin Ridley this year? Like, is George Pickens? Like, is anything speaking to you here?
No, this kind of feels like if you fall out of grace with other wide receivers, you are. I mean, 4 of these guys of the 5 are number 1 options in their offense. So it's like, sure, that's great. I do think Deontay Johnson's a great pick this year, just like value where he's going. He is going to get a lot of targets. Pickens could be a really fun pick, but it also could be frustrating. That's like my worry with Pickens. And Terry McLaurin is Terry McLaurin. I think he is who he is at this point. And having a rookie QB that can push the ball downfield should definitely help him.
I agree.
And yeah, Godwin and I don't know, Godwin, Deontay, Terry, they feel like safe picks at their spot. I don't really have any thoughts on this tier other than that.
I think Ridley could be a sneaky pick this year.
I agree.
All signs point towards Hopkins, being healthy, but the guy is 32. He is significantly older than pretty much every single guy we've already talked about today. And I think to Shaun's point too, I think they're just going to pass a ton. I don't see the Titans winning a whole lot of football games this year, which is, pretty good for, passing scripts. So, no, I think Calvin Ridley, it just felt like everything that like could have gone wrong last year and Jacksonville kind of did for him. It's just like the drops. Trevor wasn't very good at decision making. It just felt like it was bad luck left and right for that team. So I think, love the fresh start in Tennessee. If Will Levis is even like an average quarterback, he could be an absolute slam dunk in the wide receiver 30s this year.
Yeah, it's a good pick. Like, you paid up big time for Calvin Ridley last year. He got the usage, didn't have the efficiency. Yeah. Now he's super cheap. Yeah. I agree. It's really not a bad pick. Yeah. This tier's fine. Next tier, guys, here is the young guys with elite upside. Like, it could be zeros. They could be league winners. I've got 4 in this tier: Xavier Worthy, Jaden Reed, Rome Odunze, Ladd McConkey. I'm up on most of the guys in this tier. I'm down on Jaden Reed. I think he's the most talented wide receiver the Packers have, but he could be limited to role and usage. I don't know. Like, he was the wide receiver 31 as a rookie in fantasy points per game. He could easily be a top 24 guy, but love to see him crack the top 2. And then Worthy, Rome, and Ladd. They all have a ton of potential. They all play really different roles. Rome is an elite prospect. I just think it's going to be frustrating. He's stuck behind 2 of 2023's best wide receivers. Yep. So it's going to take an injury. I really don't think Keenan Allen's going to get taken off the field. Like, he's just too good in my opinion. But or they just run a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. See, we already saw Shane Waldron already doing a bunch of 2 tight end shit with Gerald Everett and Cole Kmet. It's one preseason game, so take it with a grain of salt. But
it's going to be
that could be a thing. So I don't know, guys. What do you guys think about these 3 rookies and Jaden Reed?
I want Ladd. If I had to pick one guy in here, it's Ladd. There is no one in that passing offense. It's the exact opposite of Rome. It's everyone has gone. Like, we'll get more into it on our flag plans here, but it's like, dude, like half of that passing offense is gone and just completely up for the grabs. Very good prospect. So I really like Ladd, wide receiver 40 something. No, I like that a lot. I think his role is by far the clearest in their offense. And, we love Justin Herbert. We're a big Herbert podcast here. So Ladd would be my pick out of these 4.
My favorite has got to be Odunze in this.
There it is.
Can definitely talk about this more in a flag plant or fade episode that we are doing. But I'm a big fan of Rome Odunze in this. I mean, if you think of where the other rookie wide receivers are going that were drafted near him, like Malik Nabers is a full tier. 2 tiers ahead of this. You have Marvin Harrison, 3 tiers ahead of Rome Odunze. I mean, this is the 9th wide receiver off the board. coming off a ultra productive college career, and there is really not much to pick apart in his player profile. So I feel like he could be a very much in play for a late season league winner for fantasy drafters this year if you play your cards right.
I agree. I think he's definitely someone, if you draft him, just keep him on the end of your bench. Do not drop him.
You cannot drop
him.
No, you can't do that.
Next tier, guys, I got here, just a bunch of veterans. Could be easily wide receiver 3s, could be easily wide receiver 5s at the end of the year. I've got DeAndre Hopkins, Joshua Palmer, Hollywood Brown, Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Cortland Sutton. Addison and Smith-Njigba are a little bit younger. But I guess in this tier, my big riser is Josh Palmer. I think he could just walk into 1,000 yards as Justin Herbert's wide receiver 1. He could be this year's Nico Collins, right? I doubt it. I don't think he's that good, but
crazy
in terms of where he just has a really big year. I mean, he's the only guy on this team. I think there are only 2 other guys on this team that have caught a touchdown pass from Justin Herbert before. So, like, I don't know. He was good last year before he got hurt.
Yeah.
He's just a really easy pick at the end of drafts. Like, he's going off the board as a wide receiver 57. It's basically free. Like, Palmer's a great pick, in my opinion. And you can drop him if he isn't good, right? He's going that late.
Yeah,
so
it's not going to cost you much.
Big fan of Palmer. And down on Hollywood Brown, he's already injured. Probably a good pick, I guess, considering the environment he's in and how much he costs. But I don't know how good he is. Like, he hasn't been good in like 18, 20 months. He signed a pretty low-level deal. I'm a believer in Rice and Worthy, so kind of down on Brown. But anyone else in this tier, guys, that's standing out to you?
I'd probably
JSN.
Yeah, JSN, yeah.
Were you going to say the same thing, Aidan?
I was going to say Hopkins, but JSN would be my other one. Like, Hopkins is the same argument I kind of have for Ridley. Like, dude, he's so cheap. Was wide receiver 22 last year. Like, he's kind of already done it with Will Levis, and you're getting him in like the 10th round. Again, like very low cost. But JSN would probably be my second one, Keegan.
Yeah.
All right, last tier, guys. This is a bit of a mystery box tier.
I'm not trying.
I got Jameson Williams. Yeah, Jameson Williams, Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Watson, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Romeo Doubs. Those are wide receivers 46 to 53 in my rankings. My 2 favorite guys in this tier are Brian Thomas Jr. He's like a clear starter in the Jags offense. No one's talking about him. He's flying super under the radar, which I think is encouraging. And I really do like Romeo Doubs. I just think he's going to run a shit ton of routes. And there's been a lot of positive camp buzz. He could potentially have a year 3 breakout. So those are my 2 in this tier. Keegan, is anyone standing out to you here in this tier?
There are 2. I also like that you highlighted Romeo Doubs. I feel like people are kind of like overbuying into the Dontavian Wicks hype, and like people love Jaden Reed, but Jaden Reed does not run out on 2 wide receiver sets. You know, like Romeo Doubs, I think, is one of the only wide receivers in that room that can say he will for sure be on the field for 2 wide receiver sets. On the other side, it's either going to be Wicks or it's going to be Christian Watson, and then 3 wide receiver sets, and comes Jaden Reed. But Keon Coleman and Jameson Williams are 2 in this tier that I would definitely like to target. They are going so low.
So cheap.
I mean, so cheap. Like, the Keon Coleman haters, of which are many, are ridiculous. Advanced stat this, advanced stat that. Like, just watch him play football. Like, Keon Coleman might be a perfect matchup for Josh Allen, who was like such a big project. But look, they just let him play football. And you know what? Turns out he's pretty fucking good at it. My gut tells me that Keon Coleman, if you just let him play football, is going to be pretty fucking good at it. There's also not a wide receiver in that room who is built like Keon Coleman. Like, Curtis Samuel is not built like that. Khalil Shakir is not built like that. Like, they don't have a wide receiver who has the typical red zone threat ability that Keon Coleman does, or the downfield like body or wide receiver architect. Like, he is the only one in that room. It's going to be rocky in the beginning, but I think it'll pay off with patience. And you're looking at a rookie wide receiver who might be Josh Allen's number 1 target by the end of the year, which is like, that's what you want. I mean, we've got 3 Buffalo wide receivers here in the same tier. And if I had to pick between them, I'm going Keon every time. Like, I'll just fight with the upside. And then Jameson is like a drug that I can't quit. I mean,
You're addicted, bro.
On a per touch basis, like he's so electric when he gets the ball in his hands. Like I just think there's so much room for him to improve and absorb a really healthy role in a Detroit offense that is really vacant for a third party to step up from the pass catchers, at least. Like they have a lot of weapons, but if you only look at the pass catchers, you have Amon, you have Sam Laporta. So they need a third guy to catch up in that pass catching room. And I think Jameson's definitely primed to do it.
Can't do that. I just can't do it. The only one I'm really looking at here is Samuel. Brady brought him in for a reason. Like they've got history together in Carolina. I don't really care for that. Christian Watson, never, absolutely never. BTJ, I actually do like. I think he's got a much different skill set than Kirk. And I doubt Gabe Davis is really, it's fitting that he's on the Jags because like that's truly just like all over me. So that's kind of my thoughts on this final tier, but it's gross. Like, ugh, yuck.
Jameson Williams is very interesting. Like we just learned that, Jahmyr Gibbs has a hamstring injury. So like what if Jahmyr Gibbs has a super injury riddled season? All of a sudden touches, targets are going to start getting shifted in other places. And we just need Jameson Williams to see 100 targets. I just don't know where that's going to come from. It's like I'm trying to make my monthly budget, and I'm just like trying to get Jameson Williams an extra 20, 25 targets. And I don't know where they're coming from. Like, they're going to run the shit out of the ball.
Like 70, bro. I'm struggling to get him mentally there on 70. Like 100 is such a pipe dream.
I know, man. But if he gets 100 targets, I think he actually could do some damage. But it sounds cliche, better in best ball pick. I don't know which week he's going to have a big week, but I know he's going to have some big weeks.
Best ball and Watson, I'm okay with there. Non-redraft. You're going to get zeros.
53 receivers. It's a severe undertaking. We almost didn't make it through the great Rashee Rice debate of 2024.
That was close.
But we're here.
Mark yourself safe.
Keegan's already teasing some spicy takes for later in the week that I am very excited to hear. It's gonna be fun. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're gonna be dropping more wide receiver content this week, more mock drafts. Make sure to stay tuned for that in your feed. All right, guys. Until next time.